Welcome to the Unexceptional Moms podcast. This is episode 25, and my name is Ellen Stumbo.
And I'm Erin Lorraine, and today we are going to be talking about experiences in the NICU and having a medically fragile child. And our guest today is Kathy McClelland.
So Kathy and I actually connected a couple of years ago, and she got to do a guest post for me, and it's called I Wish I Had Known. So if you go to ellenstumble.com/episode 25 with the number, you will get to see, there's a link to that post if you want to see it. And along with that, Kathy has agreed to provide a really awesome freebie for us. So Kathy, share with us what the freebie is going to be.
Yes. The freebie will be a hospital packing list for those of us who have medically fragile kids. We end up in the ER or admitted to the hospital quite often. And so I'll have a hospital packing list as well as a guide for how to prioritize when you're in a crisis situation. And you need to take care of urgent things, but also paying the bills and mowing the lawn and things like that. So I'll have a couple of practical tools for you.
So if you go ellenstumble.com/episode 25, if you scroll to the bright orange button, it's going to say, yes, send me the hospital packing list, or it's going to say something like that. Just click on that and it's going to come into your inbox right away. So the other thing about Kathy is she's actually an author, and she wrote a book, and it is called Beauty in Broken Dreams, a hopeful handbook for the early years as a special needs parent. So we will also have links to her blog, so you can go there and you can find all the information that you would like to find on her book and her writing and her blogging. So as we talk about that, we can dive in, huh?
Okay, sounds great.
So let's start. Just share with us your story, because obviously I never had a kid in the NICU, and I mean, not really as a preemie. And Erin, you didn't have to deal with NICU either. So you're the expert here.
Yes, it's a jolting experience when you have a baby, because you prepare your birth plan to look a certain way. And of course, they don't always go as planned, but when you end up in the NICU, it can be quite shocking. So my first son, he's 7 years old. He was born at 34 weeks. And so he was premature, and he is what the neonatologists call a feeder grower. So he was in the NICU for 3 weeks and just learning how to eat and breathe and just mature. And so when I was pregnant with my second son, 3.5 years later, when I got to 37 weeks, I was all excited because I thought, we're going to bypass the NICU. But when he was born, we started to notice some things about him that were concerning. He had a really weak cry. He had a spot on the back of his head that was like a birthmark that ran down his spine, and he had a hard time nursing. He seemed to be choking on amniotic fluid a lot. And so the night that we went to recover, he had turned blue, and so my husband pulled the call button and suctioned him, and he got whisked away. He couldn't keep his temperature up. He wasn't doing normal baby things. And so he was admitted to the NICU, and I was alone in my hospital room waiting for news of my baby. And when the neonatologist came downstairs to fill me in, he said that we're seeing some things with him that lead us to believe he might have a syndrome. And there were just some markers. He had that palmar crease on his hands and the wide set eyes. And they did an x-ray. His heart was in the wrong position in his chest. And so over the next couple of weeks, we did more testing. We sent blood work off to Mayo Clinic, and it was confirmed that he has something called cri de chat syndrome, which is French for cry of the cat, which is why his cry was so remarkable. And he had several medical abnormalities affecting his brain and his spine. His heart is affected, and his kidneys. So it was really devastating to us to just be flooded with that information in the early days when we were expecting a healthy baby. And so it involved a lot of grieving our expectations, not just that we were in the NICU, but that there was long-term implications. He was really ill in the beginning, and so at one point he got so sick that he actually coded 3 times, but I remember specifically being there for one time, and it was really scary, obviously, and I didn't know if he was ever going to make it outside of the walls of the hospital. And then I knew that if he did and he survived and he grew into adulthood, that his disabilities were so significant that we would be living with an adult child. And so it was really disorienting to process those 2 extremes of fearing that his life would end in the hospital, or learning what it was going to look like to parent a child with some pretty significant disabilities.
Now, a couple things. He's 4 now, correct?
He will be 4 the end of May, yes.
Okay. And then the other thing I wanted to ask is, how long was he in the NICU?
He was in the NICU for about 2 months. When he got really ill, he was transferred from my delivery hospital to the local children's hospital. At that point, we just couldn't figure out everything that was going on with his different body systems. And so we needed the specialist to round on him to give us a little bit more information about what was going on.
I think, first of all, anytime that you have a baby, I think most moms, we hope that we can go home with our baby, 2 days later. So dealing with my baby is sick. What if my baby doesn't make it? That's really hard emotionally. I mean, I can't imagine anything harder for a mother than it is to lose a child. But then for those of us who parent kids with disabilities, then we do know that adding disability to that, again, it's almost like it makes the emotions maybe explode.
Yes.
Like
yes.
One, I feel like we can only handle so many emotions at once. And sometimes a crisis situation makes us have so many different emotions that it's even hard to know which one do I focus on. Do I focus on the grief? Do I focus on the fight? Because sometimes you feel like you have to fight. Do I focus on, and you just gave birth, you're exhausted, you're tired. And there's a lot more than just the medical.
Hormones.
Yes.
Yes. It's very disorienting. And I remember the only moments where I remember having peace were when I went up to the NICU and grabbed him out of the bed and sat in a rocking chair and held him. And I would just read through Psalms. And that was the thing that gave me the most peace, because he was a baby and he was sweet, just like any other baby. And I wanted to soak up every single moment of that as much as I could, and not focus too much on the what ifs and what our life would look like, because I was reading all of these things that were really intense. They were things I was not planning to experience or to have my child struggle with. The geneticist, when we were delivered the diagnosis, said he may never walk, he may never talk, he might never eat. And so which were really hard things.
As a side note, I have yet to hear of geneticists who do a good job at talking about some of those things with the people who they meet. No, really, I think I understand, and I know that this is different, but I understand that from a medical perspective, they're supposed to, try to tell you what someone's life is going to be like, but they don't really know what an everyday life is outside of the medical field. They have no idea what a home life is going to be like. They don't see those families when things are going well. They only see families in the midst of crisis or in the difficult aspects of disability.
So true.
But not in the everyday. So, and the reason I point that out is that I feel like for those of us who have little babies, even though I was not in the NICU with my kids, I feel like we're already in a really vulnerable state. And then this medical professionals, instead of giving you any hope or encouragement or making you feel like it's going to be okay, they dump more on you. So like you said, he's never going to. Like, okay, this is already hard. Now you're describing the worst possible scenario.
Right. That you don't know for sure is going to become a reality. And if it is, what I've seen over the last almost 4 years is how God has prepared me for the role. And so when I find myself in challenging situations, for example, with Nathan, he has a feeding tube. He didn't leave the NICU without it. We had to have one surgically placed because he just simply was not able to manage the suck, swallow, breathe that he needed to eat. And so that was really devastating for me, because as a mom, how we nurture our children is through feeding them, especially babies. That's the way we connect with them. And I really wanted to delay that surgery because I wanted to give him a chance to eat, and I wanted it for him, and I wanted it for me. And over time, I've come to accept his feeding tube, and we are bonded and we are connected to one another. It's just been a different journey. It's looked differently for us, and it's not as hard as I thought it was when he was first born. You know, to go to a restaurant, what does that look like? You know, just different things that I anticipating being the end of the world. We've figured them out. God has carried us through them, and he has, you know, he's made it our normal, and it's okay.
I really like.
Oops, sorry, Ellen.
No, you go ahead.
Something else I want to make note of is that you were going through this and you already had another child to care for.
Yes.
So what did that look like for you and for your family?
That was one of the hardest parts when we were in the NICU, is I wanted to be with both of them at the same time, and it was physically impossible. Our oldest was 3.5 at the time, and he did come up to the NICU and visit brother, but he couldn't be there for long. He didn't have the attention span for it.
Right.
It was intense. And I, emotionally, I felt like I didn't want to transfer any of my grief onto him, because he wasn't experiencing that. He didn't lose anything. This is the life that he was given. And so, it's a different relationship for him with his brother than it is for me as Nathan's mom. And I felt very guilty, because I thought, oh my goodness, I wanted him to have a sibling, but now his life it's changed the trajectory of his life. It's changed, you know, how he will grow up, and his relationship with his peers, and into adulthood, what his role will be in his brother's life. And so that was really challenging. And just from a practical standpoint too, we had to figure out a schedule for how we would manage our NICU days, because I needed to be with both of them. And it was really hard to leave Nathan in the NICU, but we had several really great nurses that we trusted, that we had built relationships with. You go really deep with nurses really fast when you're in the hospital, because, you know, it's intense. And so we also had some friends come and hold Nathan. Everything that we were reading about brain development said that physical touch is so important to brain development. And so we, as much as possible, wanted to have him held. And so we had some friends who volunteered to come really early in the morning or really late at night, just to hold him and pray over him and sing to him. And so I could go home and be with my oldest as well, and just do the bedtime routine, and just kind of keep some of those things that were the same in his life, like they had always been. So it was a lot of back and forth from the hospital, and a lot of juggling.
Which I've heard that from several NICU parents. It's that having another child at home, how do you, like you said, you can't be in two places at the same time. And I think emotionally as a parent, that also, you know, just it kicks you in the gut, you know, like I have a sick baby in the hospital and I want to be there every single minute, but I have a small child who needs me.
Mhm.
And they can't understand why mommy or daddy are gone all the time.
Right.
And like you said, and you don't want to show that you're sad because
Right.
you don't want to transfer any of those
Right.
feelings that wouldn't be appropriate, maybe for a young child to have, because they
Right.
do, they have a different relationship. They're the siblings.
Right, right. And we also needed, the other dimension to it is that we also needed to normalize it for our oldest in some way, because Nathan did come home with a feeding tube. And so what we did is we had a child life specialist in the NICU come and help us talk through what that was and what it did, and how it's a noodle that goes down your nose and it's how you get food, and just to explain it in terms that he could understand, and that it was okay. Some people eat with their mouth and some people eat with a tube in their tummy. And I mean, kids are so resilient, and he just accepted it, I mean,
Yes.
that's just how it's always been with Nathan, and that's okay. That's who he is, and he loves him.
Mm-hmm.
It is pretty incredible how kids are more willing to accept differences and to not see it as something bad, but just different. Because I remember when my oldest was little, we were talking to a neighbor, and she said, he said, oh, you had a little, sister. And of course, in Iowa at the time during winter, you just don't see people. So it was the spring. And she said, yes, and my sister has Down syndrome. And the neighbor said, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. And then she looked at him and was like, what are you sorry about? There's nothing to be sorry about. She's so cute, and she just went on. And I thought, that's right on, like kids somehow get it. So my brother eats with, did you say that you guys called it a noodle? Or
because it started out going through his nose down into his tummy, and then now we call it a button. It's
a button. Yes. So kids just get it, and
they do.
Somebody walks different, and somebody looks different, and they just, if only we could learn from them, right?
That's right. They're our teachers in many ways.
Yeah.
Now, Kathy, in a past episode, we talked about PTSD and trauma, and we specifically made mention of parents and children who went through NICU experiences and their experiences with PTSD and trauma. So can you tell us what that looked like for you?
Yes. I would say it's ongoing, actually. When Nathan was born, it was a crisis for our family. We were scared that he wasn't going to survive. And we spent a lot of hours in the hospital. And so there are still sights and sounds that will bring me right back to a hospital room. For example, the smell of the soap, if I'm at the hospital, even if we're not inpatient, if we're there for therapy, if I wash my hands, that smell will just send me right back to when he was born. And it's interesting because even as over the last 4 years, he's been admitted for various different surgeries and illnesses, there are, I think, a lot of similarities between being in a hospital setting and a war zone, because not everyone, but most people are fighting for their lives. And just the noises will bring you back, the beeping of, the monitors, things like that. It's intense, and you have to, I think, learn how to be okay with it kind of sucker punching you at times, and maybe not be surprised by it. Because the first few times I was sent back to that place, it just kind of overwhelmed me and had the potential to become debilitating. But now when something happens that triggers that sense of grief that I felt in the beginning, I can sit within it and acknowledge it. It's not as visceral as it was in the beginning, where you just feel it on a cellular level in your body. You feel it, and it washes over you and it subsides, and you can go on. It's part of how I felt the experience has been for me. And also just acknowledging, looking back in the rearview mirror of what God has brought us through, and saying, Lord, you provided and you will continue to provide, and just trusting that, whatever is ahead that we can't see, he'll be there to carry us through that trauma if it's coming.
And something that's often true of PTSD is that it hits you sometimes when you least expect it.
Yeah.
And it hits you at times. So I was recently, someone on Facebook who had lost a child was saying the 2.5-year mark was horrible for her. So like, I don't know what it is about that mark, but kind of when you think you've worked through it, it can hit you again. So I think it's important for people to know that's normal, and and it can be worked through. Have you had to seek therapy or anything?
I have, yes. And it is really unexpected as to when it hits. Last December, we're in the height of holiday season, and I had family that I was anticipating coming, and I was looking forward to that and just to all the Christmas celebrations. But I was just, for some reason, in this place of, I just felt like a dark cloud was following me around, and just really unusually anxious, and for some reason more fearful again of Nathan not living. It just kind of happens from time to time where I'll have this overwhelming fear that he isn't going to be with us for long. And that happened at Christmas time. And so I did seek some therapy for it. It was very helpful to talk to someone who was validating what I was experiencing and listening. And I didn't feel like I was burdening that person like I would have if and I did. I shared it with friends and of course with my spouse, but I didn't feel like I was putting something on them that they had to carry when you go and you talk to a therapist. So it was really helpful. And I think, it's like you said, what is it about that time of year, that 2.5-year mark? And it's kind of unique to every individual. And I always had these positive associations with Christmas, especially in my childhood. But looking back, I see Advent is a little bit of a dark time too. I mean, we're a broken world longing for a savior. And I think it just kind of underscored that in my life, just the brokenness in my life and how I'm longing for completion and full redemption. And so, it was just highlighted for me in that season.
And I like that you bring up the idea of talking to a therapist, because, a therapist is a best friend that you pay so they will listen to you. But I do think that there's something very helpful of having someone that you can pay who's not a part of your life, who can look at your situation as an outsider and not as your friend, or whatever. Because I joke with my husband that with him being a professional counselor, he can be my counselor. Well, no, of course you can't. Right. Because it's just, you can't have that, you can't have that. Just like he could never, even be a counselor for Aaron or Larry, because they're our friends. So, which is understandable why they do that. And I am a huge fan of counseling. And I mean, a side note, I do think that it would be so helpful if there were practices in place so that every time that you have a parent go through a crisis, whether it be NICU, a new diagnosis, losing a child, whatever it is. And I think they do better when we're talking about child loss, that there's a little bit more understanding and support. And I say that hesitantly because immediately maybe there's more support. I don't know that there's the ongoing support, but if we could have that in place to have a safe person to talk to, someone who can listen to you, validate your feelings, but hopefully help you in ways that you can cope with life a little bit better. I think chronic grief, people who go through chronic grief, if you're still dealing with chronic grief, it's time to see a counselor. If it's been a period of battling depression or anxiety, it's time to see a counselor. those issues coming between a marriage, maybe it's time to see a counselor. Right. And I love our therapist, and we haven't seen her for a while, but I'm already thinking like I miss her. I know.
There's something powerful about bringing those thoughts and feelings into the light, and where someone can speak truth into them,
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So, when you were in the NICU, what are things that people could have done to help you?
Well, they did a lot of the things that they could have. I mean, our community was incredible. The most helpful things were help with our oldest son. We don't have family that lives nearby locally, and so we had to lean into our community quite a bit for play dates for our oldest. As I mentioned, people that would go down and hold Nathan when he was still in the NICU. People came and mowed our lawn. They brought meals. They would bring things that I didn't even know that I needed. It's almost funny looking back. One of the things I remember the most was, it was so helpful to me. I would have never thought of it, but it was a little notebook that they had packed into something that they had brought down to the hospital. And I just started journaling in it. And that's kind of when I started writing, is just kind of writing down everything that I was experiencing and feeling. And then I also, I flipped it over, and in the back side of it, I started to take down notes of medical terminology. My husband is a physician assistant, and so it was really helpful to have him there and kind of lead into his knowledge and expertise. I don't have a medical background, and so all of this was a completely new language to me that I was having to learn. And so just to be able to write down things to remember different diagnoses and specialist names and telephone numbers, people that I needed to call. And so that became a really helpful tool to me, and something that I recommend to anybody when they're in the hospital, is to just, you're going to forget things because you're surviving, and so it's good to write it down.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. When you said that people came and held Nathan, I thought that was such a neat thing.
I did too, actually.
Yeah, that I think people would love to help a family like that if that was something that was needed,
Yes. I mean, it's one of our favorite memories of that time, is just how willing they were to go hold our sweet baby and pray for him and just love on him when we couldn't be there. And it, I think it spoke to the staff too a lot, just to have them see that people were there, people cared about this child that, just had a really grim diagnosis, and people showed up and loved him, and it was really special. And to this day too, I sometimes joke with people, Nathan to this day loves physical touch. He will make his way into your lap one way or another, and I sometimes attribute that to the fact that he was held a lot when he was in the hospital.
But what a reassuring thing as a parent. I can't be there to hold my baby. My husband can't be there to hold my baby, but Aaron is there holding my baby, or my friend from church is there holding my baby. Someone is there. Yeah. We talk about it takes a village to raise a child, but we live in such a independent culture, or individualistic, I should say, that we don't see that a lot. And I remember even before I had kids, every time that there was a baby dedication, at least at the church we were at, we would all stand and we all said that we agreed that we would help raise this child. And, as they grew, and I remember one time saying, this is not true. Nobody does that. Nobody actually does life together. Everybody's doing their own thing. But what if we did take that to heart and we said, when that baby is in the NICU, it's not, it's not just Kathy's baby, it's our baby. Our baby is in the NICU, so we get to be there for him.
Yeah, it was really special. It really was.
That's neat. But then the more practical things like lawn mowing, that is not going to happen when you're in crisis. I know from experience, and it wasn't a hospital situation, but those are those little things that you talked about at the very beginning that still have to be done.
Yes, they do. They do.
Yeah.
Bills have to get paid. I mean, there's deadlines for things you can't miss. And so I feel like my husband and I were pretty conscious of, okay, well, what can we ask for help? What can we outsource? You know, what can we give up in our budget so that we can have someone clean our house for this period of time or for this often? Yeah, it's been kind of thinking about things more interdependently, which is against our culture. It's against my nature too. I mean, I've always been pretty independent, and so it requires you to be humble and ask for help or accept help, and trust that people love to serve too. They want to help you, and that you're serving them by letting them serve you.
You are.
You know, I had a really good friend of her family say that. He said one time, don't deny me the blessing of being able to help you. And that was really humbling to hear, but it was also very eye-opening because I have been in situations where I am able to help someone. But if they don't tell me, you know, I don't know, where once I know, I do it gladly. And it is a blessing for me. I mean, I know that it can be a blessing for them, but it's also a blessing, you know, for me and for my family. So those are good things for all of us to keep in mind, which, I mean, the great thing with the freebie that you're providing is that you know, you've already gone through that and you found a system that works really well. So to be able to help other people. That way.
Yeah, just to help you think through everything that you do, and what you want to keep, what you want to get rid of, what you want to keep for a time. You know, maybe you have to let go of it for a season. For one of those things was working out. I knew I was under such a high level of stress and I needed to work out. My body needed that, but I just couldn't for a time. And I just took it off even expecting that of myself, just letting it go and then putting it back on later. So,
which that's true. There are seasons of life where things have to be different.
Right. Yeah. So that kind of swings into something else we wanted to discuss with you, which is advice. What tips, thoughts, advice do you have for other parents who maybe are in a NICU experience, have been in a NICU experience, might be in a NICU experience, or even who have a medically fragile child?
Right. I think the number one tip that I would give is to be conscious of what your expectations were, and notice how to adjust and to change given what your circumstances are, and to be gracious with yourself in the process. And I think to just be a learner too, because when you are given a new diagnosis, in many situations, it's completely out of your realm of expertise. It was for me. And so there was a huge learning curve, and I asked a lot of questions. I pursued relationships with parents who had the same diagnosis so that I could learn, you know, more of what we were up against, and also what was positive. You know, I mean, we were talking about all of the things that he wouldn't be able to do, but I wanted to know what these kids were doing. And so I think researching, leaning into the nurses when you're in the hospital is key, especially in the NICU, because they, I think, realize how many hormones are raging through your body and how you need sleep. in order to be the best mom for your child and how to make good decisions. And so, you know, to be okay going home and getting a good night's sleep, that's okay, I think is a big one.
That's good advice right there.
Yeah. And it's hard to do because you want to be with your baby. You feel like you should be with your baby, but
Of course.
you can be more present after you sleep. And so, that's actually, we, with my first, who I mentioned earlier, was a preemie when he came home from the hospital, and we went through those early days of, you know, sleepless nights. My husband and I were joking, can we send him back to the NICU? Really needed some sleep. So that can be a perspective changer for sure.
Yeah.
There are some hospitals where they do a great job of reminding parents that you need to rest.
Yeah.
At Mayo Clinic, where our experiences with hospitalizations have been mainly there, they do a really good job of taking care of the parents and sometimes saying, you've been here for 2 days overnight. We'll take care of your kid.
Yeah,
you know, like you need to rest. Yeah.
Yeah.
And sleeping on those hard little couches doesn't count as rest. I just did that last week. So when they told us, so we, Oksana had some procedures done, and we were out of town and we didn't finish till about 5:00. So they said, we can arrange for you to spend another night here. If you don't, it was dark, it was rainy, you know, if you don't want to make the trip home tonight. And I was like, oh no, really? Thank you for the hard couch to sleep on, but I'm going to make the trip home.
Out of here.
And then hospitals are notorious for doctors walk in whenever they want, and they talk.
Oh, we had no sleep.
I don't know, Erin, if you saw, I made a sign and I took a picture. Actually,
yes, I remember that.
Before. I was like, you wake her up, you know, you're going to help her go to sleep. And it was not a very kind one, but I was like fed up. Like, no. I mean, I get it that you have your job, respect, but that's besides the point. Maybe that's something, you know, when you're in the NICU though, it's different.
It is different
than really when if your child is, you know, later having hospitalization or just even a procedure done.
Yeah.
Because there's something, I mean, the fragility of life, you know, it can happen at any time, but there's something about having your little tiny baby who was safe inside your womb. And all the dreams and expectations and the anticipation of this new life that comes, you know, to such a halt, you know, like what's going to happen with my baby. Right. And of course there are other times, but
yes. And I think you're right, Ellen, because Nathan has been hospitalized several times since the NICU, and it is a different experience. There's different expectations on you as a parent where you're not as encouraged to go home as much as you are in the NICU. You're actually expected to stay there. And so you kind of have to adjust to that different type of hospitalization with a medically fragile child too. And the packing list that I will offer in the freebie that's also available in my book, Beauty in Broken Dreams, I have in there it broken out by different categories. And I just underscore in there the emphasis on comfort over cute, right? Because it's comfort for you, comfort for your child. And that I think has made a difference in our hospital stays. I actually recommend bringing an egg crate, Erin, for those really hard pull-out couches.
Smart.
Yeah. You know, you have to make it, you know, as much like home as you possibly can if you're going to be there for a while.
Yeah.
Have a good attitude about it, and you know, and for your child too.
And as you say that, I think it's a good thing to point out the reality that for some families, that is such an, you know, an expected part of your life with a medically fragile child, that you are going to spend a lot of time in hospitals, and you end up learning to do something that to make life more comfortable. Yeah. That maybe someone who's not, that's not part of their life, like that's not their child. When it happens, it kind of hits you a little bit more. But when you do have a child who, medically is going to require more hospitalizations or can get sick very easily, how helpful to have someone who has gone through a list to say, this helps, this makes it a little bit more tolerable or bearable as much as you can, maybe not emotionally, but at least physically. So sometimes, if you can alleviate at least, the physical side of it, hopefully it helps you manage with those, those emotions a little bit better.
Right.
And having a list takes all the brain power out of it.
Oh yeah.
Right.
You don't have to think about it.
I was so thankful. I thought I'd bring my slippers. I looked ridiculous tromping around the hospital in my slippers, but they were so comfortable on that hard, cold floor.
I know. Yes. Yeah, that's a good one. Comfortable shoes. I also have a go bag packed in case we need to go to the hospital quickly. And then I know I have all of Nathan's essential things. And even mine. I know I have a toothbrush packed. I know I have a case for my contacts, just the bare necessities that I need that I can grab and go. And we've had to grab and go before, so it's helpful.
So those are things that are helpful. And how do you handle the emotional side of having your child in the NICU? Like, how do you process your feeling? How did you survive? How do you make it?
Well, I think my faith is a big piece of it, just leaning into the Lord in that time. And there is, I think, an intimacy with God that you experience in times of crisis. And if you're open to it, and that was really sweet in the midst of a lot of pain, just to experience the nearness of God. And my prayer life, I think, was a big piece to surviving it. And worship songs, a lot of friends would send me music, and I remember replaying a couple of them over and over again and just letting those truths marinate in my mind. That was a big piece of surviving, because a lot of my days and hours were spent just sitting there waiting for something to happen, waiting for the next procedure or the next doctor to round. And so just sitting around and being able to listen to music or read scripture to pass the time, I think was a big piece of surviving. And writing too. I started blogging, and it was helpful for me to start sharing our story. I knew that I couldn't be in denial over Nathan's diagnosis. I couldn't change it. And so I didn't, even though it was so hard to share such personal stuff going on, I felt like I needed to share his story. And part of it was too, it was hard to get word out to all of our family and friends. And so blogging became a way to do that. But also just to be able to write so honestly, and it was really helpful. I really experienced a lot of peace through writing too.
As you say that, I wonder how much the fact that you were willing to share that part of your life, as you talk about having friends that would come and hold Nathan, that, they got to journey with you as well,
Right.
and I would think that would be part of why I want to go hold your baby. I feel like I'm connected to your story.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it was a way of inviting them into our life, into Nathan's life. And I really believe that even though he's nonverbal, even though he doesn't eat by mouth, even though he doesn't walk, he has a little ministry
Mm-hmm.
Just through his showing up at church every Sunday, you know, and people know him and they say hi and they accept him and receive him, and he has a place in a little classroom, and you know, just by showing up, he, I think, is ministering to other people. And it's really cool because I'm a doer, you know. I like to do things that are productive and there's evidence that change is happening, and for him it's just being here with us is huge.
Well, I think that's the beauty of the body of Christ. When we, you know, when we really look at what the body of Christ looks like, that every single member is invaluable. And if Nathan was not a part of the body, then that body would be functioning without all of its members. So in order to be fully functioning, we need everybody. And I mean, that's a different topic. And we've touched a little bit about that when we did the podcast on disability, you know, church and disability, which is my big passion in life, is to see every church embrace disability. But just, I think even from a Christian perspective, I mean, in general, to stop looking at disability as something bad. And I think for most of us who are able-bodied people, it's hard to imagine it should be different. And it's hard to imagine if we lived with certain limitations when we see our kids living with those. But some of my closest friends are, you know, they're disabled, and to hear them say, this is all I've ever known. My body has always been disabled. This has always been me. And it's like, you know, if somebody told me, you know, how sad they were for me for, you know, having brown eyes, or maybe some people feel bad that I'm Mexican. I don't know. But, you know, things about you that you can't change because it's part of who you are and it's part of your identity, that sometimes as parents, if we can change that conversation to see each life as completely valuable and important as part of the body of Christ. Because you're right, your son does have, you know, a ministry, and he has a role to play. And if he doesn't do his role, then nobody else can fulfill it. And he, you know, God did prepare works in advance for him to do. And, you know, now your job is to disciple him and see how God is going to use his gifting. But if his gifting isn't being, you know, some of us can't be that person. Not, you know, he does have a role.
Right.
Sorry about my tangent.
No. Okay. Yeah, he teaches me the value of observing other people, and he teaches me about patience, and he teaches me about sacrificing. You know, it's not his choice to have disabilities and, you know, sacrifice many of the things that we just take for granted as able-bodied people. But he teaches me to sacrifice for him just through his life. It's an example to me. It's an example to other people too. And yeah, it's cool.
And I think it's pretty incredible how God orchestrates that, because what parent won't sacrifice for their child?
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
I mean,
right.
We'll do
very cool.
Whatever it takes. So anything that you feel will be good for people to know, like a final advice, maybe anything that you would add?
Yes. I think I would say, because this is what I would want someone to say to me when we initially got Nathan's diagnosis, is that no doctor can tell you who he's going to be or what he's going to do or not do, and that's a journey that you get to experience, and to be open to it, even though it's scary, to step into that fear and to watch and see how God will provide. I think that has been the most amazing piece, is that this has been an experience in my life where I, in many instances, have had zero control on the outcome or changing the circumstances. And so it has enabled me to surrender to the work of God, that he is in control, that he he's sovereign, he had a plan, and he's good, and he will carry it out. And it's an exciting place to be. And it's not that it's like that every single day, not that I don't have really hard, discouraging days where I, want to throw in the towel or run away for a few hours. But, just, I think it's been an exhausting journey, but it's been very rewarding to look back and have a testimony of how God has worked in our lives, in Nathan's life, and the work of other people. And to just take courage in that and hope in that you'll have a story to tell in it. It will be very special. And that we have this hope that we don't always see, tangibly, but that one day we will. So yeah, that's my big advice.
Perfect.
So, so we talked about NICU experiences with Kathy, and she does have the freebie again. So ellenstamble.com/episode 25, and that's the number. There's going to be the bright orange button. You're going to click on it. It's going to go straight into your inbox. And Erin, what am I going to tell people?
I was just going to say, now brace yourselves, because Ellen's going to ask you to leave a review.
Yes, we're on iTunes, and we are now on Stitcher. And I did see that some people are listening to us on Stitcher. And guess what? It's so easy to leave a review on Stitcher as opposed to iTunes. So all you do, you go on the page, you scroll down, click, leave a review, and that's it. And then you actually can leave a review. Leave us a review, please. Erin, you need to ask that once in a while too.
But it's so fun when you do it, Ellen,
Oh, I'm sure it is. So thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Kathy.
Yes, thank you
for having me.
We're so glad that you joined us, because we are not.
That's not our area of expertise.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Thank you so much.
There's overlap, but there's differences, and
yes,
it's cool that you can learn from other people when you share stories.
Yeah, there were a number of things that you said that I thought, I've never been in that situation, and yet I know I've experienced that in other situations. Mm-hmm. So a lot of it can overlap. So great stuff. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.